When people think about ancient history, they often picture grandeur. The pyramids of Egypt, the Colosseum of Rome, the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, and the temples of Greece. These monuments inspire awe even thousands of years later. We associate them with kings, generals, and philosophers whose names echo through history. Yet behind these wonders stood millions of forgotten workers. These workers did not write philosophy, lead armies, or sit on thrones. They endured lives of drudgery, hardship, and pain. Their jobs were so filthy, so dangerous, or so degrading that their only compensation was survival. If they were lucky, the real foundation of civilization was not wealth or glory, but the suffering of those who labored in obscurity. This is their story, the story of the worst jobs in ancient history. Tomb builders in Egypt. The pyramids of Giza stand as symbols of endurance and power, but to build them required immense human effort. The construction of a single pyramid could involve tens of thousands of laborers working for decades. The myth that slaves built the pyramids has been largely challenged by modern archaeology. Evidence suggests many were skilled laborers, fed and housed in workers' villages, but being paid did not make the job any less brutal. Workers spent long days cutting limestone blocks, using copper chisels that dulled constantly. The dust choked their lungs, and the relentless desert sun burned their skin. Injuries from heavy loads were common, and medical care was primitive. Skeletons found near workers' villages show spines warped from strain, arthritis in joints, and fractures that had only partially healed. Workers who died were sometimes buried near the pyramids, but their names were lost to time. Their lives were consumed by a single task, ensuring a pharaoh's immortality. The pharaohs received monuments that lasted millennia. The workers received nothing but broken bodies and early deaths. The tanneries. Leather was vital in every ancient society. Soldiers needed it for armor and sandals, farmers for harnesses, and households for everyday items. But producing leather was among the foulest jobs imaginable. The process of tanning began with raw animal hides, which were often left to rot. To clean them, workers soaked the skins in vats of urine, then treated them with animal feces or rotting organic matter to loosen hair. They scraped the hides with rudimentary tools, their hands constantly exposed to filth and infection. The smell of tanneries was overwhelming. Even in crowded cities, they were forced to operate on the outskirts because no one wanted to live near them. Workers could never rid themselves of the stench. Their bodies and clothes carried it everywhere, marking them as unclean. In Rome, tanners were despised socially. In other cultures, they were marginalized, seen as polluted or cursed. Yet leather was indispensable. The irony was cruel. Society depended on the very people it rejected. Their work sustained armies and economies, but their reward was disease, humiliation, and exclusion. Gladiators of Rome. Perhaps no occupation captures the brutality of antiquity more than the gladiator. They're often romanticized in popular culture as warriors who fought for honor and freedom. In reality, most gladiators were slaves, criminals, or prisoners of war. Once sworn into the gladiatorial schools, they lost all autonomy. Training was relentless, overseen by harsh instructors. They lived in barracks, separated from ordinary society, and knew that every fight could be their last. The arena was not merely sport. It was a theater of death. Thousands of spectators roared as men fought for survival. Victories brought temporary reprieve, but few careers lasted long. Bones were shattered, wounds became infected, and even the most skilled eventually met their end. Yes, a small handful of gladiators achieved fame, winning the admiration of crowds and, in rare cases, their freedom. But for the vast majority, their lives ended in blood and sand, their value measured only in how entertaining their deaths appeared to others. Glory belonged to the empire, pain belonged to the gladiators. Sewer cleaners of Rome. Rome was proud of its engineering. Aqueducts carried water, and the Cloaca Maxima, the great sewer, drained waste from the city. But this marvel of infrastructure had to be maintained, and that work fell to the lowest of the low. Sewer cleaners descended into the tunnels with no protective equipment. They waded waist-deep in human waste, clearing blockages with primitive tools. Toxic gases built up in confined spaces, suffocating workers without warning. Swarms of rats added to the misery. The work was essential, Without them, Rome would have drowned in filth, disease spreading uncontrollably. Yet the cleaners themselves were invisible. They received no honor, little pay, and no gratitude. Their work kept the empire alive, but they themselves lived lives defined by disgust and danger. Miners of the ancient world. Mining was one of the most dangerous and dehumanizing occupations in antiquity. Metals such as gold, silver, and copper were essential to empires, but extracting them from the earth was a death sentence for many. Workers toiled deep underground, often in cramped shafts lit only by oil lamps. Ventilation was minimal, and dust filled the air. Collapses were frequent, burying workers alive. Poisonous gases silently suffocated others. In Rome, criminals were condemned ad metalla to the mines as punishment. This sentence was considered worse than execution. Survival in the mines was measured in months, not years. Slaves, too, were forced into the mines, living and dying in total darkness. The wealth of empires glittered above ground in coins, jewelry, and monuments. But the miners who produced that wealth died nameless in the depths of the earth. Salt workers. Salt was so valuable in the ancient world that it was sometimes used as currency. Armies marched on it, and societies depended on it to preserve food. But mining salt was agony. Workers in salt mines endured constant wounds. Crystals cut their skin, leaving open sores that never healed. Salt dust scoured their lungs, turning each breath into torment. The pain was relentless, and many died young. Archaeologists in Austria discovered the remains of entire families who worked in salt mines. Men, women, and children all labored, all suffered. The trade was called white gold, but for those who mined it, it was soaked in blood. Executioners. Executioners performed one of the most grim and stigmatized jobs in history. They carried out society's punishments, beheadings, hangings, crucifixions. Their work ensured order, yet society despised them. Executioners were feared and avoided. Many communities treated them as cursed, refusing to touch them or include them in normal life. They were often forced to live apart, marrying only within their own profession. Their existence was paradoxical, utterly necessary, yet utterly shunned. They lived with blood on their hands, their identity forever tied to death. The payment for their service was survival, but at the cost of permanent social exile. Eunuchs in imperial courts. In empires from China to Byzantium, eunuchs served in royal courts as guards, servants, and advisors. But their service began with mutilation. Young boys, often slaves, were castrated, sometimes voluntarily, but more often by force. The procedure was crude and extremely dangerous. Many died from infection before reaching adulthood. Those who survived lived with lifelong physical and emotional scars. Eunuchs were valued because they could not produce heirs, making them safe around royal families. Some rose to immense political power, influencing emperors and shaping policy. But behind this power was a life of pain and loss. Their loyalty was bought not with gold, but with their very bodies. Fullers of Rome. Laundry in ancient Rome was nothing like it is today. To clean clothes, Romans relied on fullers, workers who used urine as their primary tool. Urine, collected from public pots, contained ammonia that bleached and disinfected fabric. Fullers stomped barefoot in vats of this foul liquid, mixing it with garments. The fumes burned their lungs and irritated their skin. Diseases spread easily among them. Though their work allowed Roman citizens to wear spotless white togas, fullers themselves were ridiculed. Roman writers mocked them endlessly. They lived surrounded by filth. Their essential labor met only with contempt. Soldiers of empire. Generals carved their names into history, but ordinary soldiers bore the real weight of empire. Their lives were grueling, marked by hunger, exhaustion, and endless marching. Ancient soldiers carried heavy packs, weapons, and armor across vast distances. Disease and starvation killed more than battle ever did. When combat came, soldiers were treated as expendable. Victories brought glory to commanders, while the common soldier returned crippled or not at all. Those who survived often received little support. No pensions, no medical care, no recognition. Their reward for years of service was poverty, scars, and obscurity. Ancient prostitutes. Prostitution was widespread in antiquity, from Greece to India to Rome. But for most who practiced it, it was not a choice. Many were slaves, forced into brothels by owners who profited from their bodies. Prostitutes endured violence, disease, and constant exploitation. They lived with social stigma, scorned by the same society that relied on them. Unlike high-class courtesans who sometimes wielded influence, ordinary prostitutes lived and died in poverty. Their lives were largely unrecorded. They were exploited, forgotten, and erased from history, even as they endured one of its oldest and harshest professions. Conclusion: civilizations rise and fall, leaving behind monuments, literature, and legacies of kings. But the true cost of those civilizations was borne by ordinary people who endured the worst jobs imaginable. The tomb builders of Egypt, the tanners of leather, the gladiators who bled in arenas, the miners who suffocated underground, the sewer cleaners who waded through filth, the soldiers who died nameless in foreign lands, all gave their lives to societies that scarcely remembered them. Their wages were not gold or glory. They were paid in broken bodies, in humiliation, in disease, in early graves. They were paid in pain. History celebrates rulers, but it is time also to remember the forgotten millions who built civilization with their suffering.